Professor Aphrodite Alexandrakis was born in Alexandria, Egypt, immigrated with her parents to Greece, where she lived for 9 years before she married and immigrated to Princeton, New Jersey, United States of America. She earned her BA degree from Douglas College, Rutgers, the State University, in art history and archaeology, completed all undergraduate work in philosophy, and earned an MA and a PhD in philosophy from the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida, where she resides. Professor Alexandrakis is a Fulbright Senior Scholar and a recipient of 3 National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship Awards at the University of Tennessee, Philosophy Department, at the University of Texas, Classics Department, at the University of California at Berkeley, and her main subjects of research include Aristotle's theories of biology and their influence on Albert the Great, the Augustan era and classical aesthetics, the 5th century Chinese notion of ancient political and aesthetic ideas, Hunzi, in comparison to the Athenian ideas of the 5th century BC, and she is also the recipient of the Outstanding Dari University Faculty Award and of the University Scholar Award. She speaks and writes in English, Greek and French. She reads and translates the ancient Greek philosophy texts that she uses for her research. Her research includes topics in Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy, as well as modern aesthetic ethical theories on the metaphysical and sensual notion of beauty in fine arts and architecture. Her numerous research publications include the Pythagorean, Platonic, Neoplatonic, Byzantine and Hegelian concepts on the notion of beauty. For all these reasons that you may find in her biography and in her books and articles, Professor Alexandrakis is an expert on issues, philosophical and history of art issues and topics related with our study group of ancient όρχησης and ancient dance and music. So, in Greek for a little while, η κυρία Αλεξανδράκη έχει διατελέσει ομότιμη καθηγήτρια φιλοσοφίας στην Αμερική για πολλά χρόνια. Έχει γεννηθεί στην Αλεξάνδρεια της Αιγύπτου και όλη της η εργασία, όπως είδατε, ακούσατε στο βιογραφικό της, αφορά την αρχαιοελληνική φιλοσοφία και παιδεία, ξεκινώντας από τον Πλάτωνα, τον Αριστοτέλη, την νεοπλατωνική φιλοσοφία και κάνει και συγκριτικές σπουδές με την κινεζική φιλοσοφία, κλασική φιλοσοφία της αισθητική και πολιτική σκέψη, αλλά και με την ρωμαϊκή και ύστερη αρχαιότητα. Της έχουν επιδοθεί πολλά βραβεία, πολλές επιβραβεύσεις των μελετών της από 4 διαφορετικά αμερικανικά πανεπιστήμια και ζει στη Φλόριντα των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών. Η καταγωγή της, βέβαια, η σχέση της μάλλον, όχι η καταγωγή της, μάλλον η καταγωγή του συζύγου και η σχέση της με την Κρήτη είναι πολύ θερμή και στενή και χαιρόμαστε πολύ που την έχουμε κοντά μας, υποστηρίκτεια του έργου μας και με τη σημερινή της ομιλία μας κάνει μετόχους και του δικού της έργου, το οποίο βέβαια πρέπει στη συνέχεια να μελετήσουμε πολύ βαθύτερα και περισσότερο σε όλο το εύρος και βάθος των κειμένων της.
This paper was published about 15 years ago after a national endowment for the humanities fellowship I was given at Berkeley, and I studied the Chinese and the Greek way of democracy and dance. So here it is. The title is The Role of Music and Dance in Ancient Greek and Chinese Rituals, Form versus Content. This paper examines the role of rituals, specifically that of dance, and the role of music in rituals in ancient Greece during Plato's time. Additionally, the Platonic formal and holistic views on rituals to those of the Chinese philosopher Xunzha, who lived about 100 years after Plato in about 310 BC. Both Plato and Xunzha were concerned with similar philosophical issues, but their way of thinking about them differed sharply. Why the essence and purpose of rituals throughout the centuries remained the same, namely to maintain harmonious relationships between human society and the gods, the relative emphasis on the content and form, that is, the content is the feelings, the form is the structure, varied about from the one society to the other. Both Plato and Xunzha used the term form, but they had a different kind of understanding and approach to the notion of form. The meaning of form in Plato will be discussed first, followed by Xunzha's interpretation. I will argue that Xunzha's notion of form as regards ceremonial rites is not constricted by a rational structure. In fact, Xunzha's position is the opposite of Plato's. Chinese rituals, as conceived by Xunzha, are of an emotional nature, always expressing and focusing on emotions, that is, the content, and often associated with themes of war and combat. In the Laws, Plato praises those men, quote, who preserve measure in their pleasures, unquote, and gives credit to the inventor of the search, quote, for the truth and musical taste of the names and the philosophical insight, unquote. Plato rejects the emotional impact of any act of ceremony on man. He therefore plays down the content, that is the message, and emphasizes the form, the structure, which for him is rational and consists of several abstract elements, three of which are fundamental: harmony, rhythm, and symmetry. Indeed, according to the formalists of the, say, late 19th and early 20th century, Plato was one of the earliest representatives of form, whether in art or in any of the other areas of music, dance, and ceremonial rites. And it's most important to the Constitution, that is most important to the Constitution of the beauty of a rational whole. For Plato, as for all formalists, and the formalists are those who are called also objectivists, not subjectivism, not what I like, but what is right, and therefore is an objective truth. From the classical period to the 20th century, beauty consists of the three essential elements of harmony, rhythm, and symmetry. The term harmony was first mentioned and analyzed by Pythagoras. It means the fitting together, a rhythmic and balanced flow of lines, colors, shapes, words, or written actions from one part to another. This leads to a harmonious effect that produces a feeling of calmness, to a complete whole which can be readily perceived by the spectator. This idealized calmness is imprinted on the early 5th century Athenian sculptures and sculptural reliefs and gives them a serene, lofty beauty and grandeur of a rational construct. One of the best examples is the interior sculptural relief of the Parthenon above the Doric columns. Plato was very particular in analyzing and defining the notion of form. In the Philippus, for example, he analyzes the notion of pure form, schematon kalos, by referring to the straight and solid curved lines. I'm not going to read you the quote because it's long, but keep that in mind. Plato appreciates and values pure form, which is the result of the well-calculated spatial relations of the shapes and lines involved. Thus, despite the fact that Plato is against most forms of art, he accepts works of art made of pure form. This pure form or formal quality produces an aesthetic emotion or intellectual appreciation in the perceiver, which is quite similar to the one described by Clive Bell, namely that emotion has an intellectual, that is, a non-sensual nature. The same emotion one experiences when solving a mathematical equation. This emotion is the response to the form, the significant form, which is universal and eternal. This kind of emotion is quite different from the emotions we experience in everyday life. In common everyday emotions, form is conceived in its relation to content, and the notion of rites, the Chinese rituals, according to Xunjia, focus on human emotions, that is, the content and message. That's what Xunjia supports, and not on the rational aspect of the form and structure that Plato is looking for. So these two aspects result in two kinds of beauty: formal, that is the objective, and sensual, the subjective beauty. Formal beauty is the unity in variety, unity of formal elements such as lines, shapes, structured symmetrically, rhythmically, and harmoniously, based on a holistic, that is, an intellectual kind of beauty principle. Both formal and sensual beauty is found in rituals and in music. Most Greek rituals and religious laws originate from the oracles of Delphi and Dodona, which were the most famous religions as well as political centers. All rituals were dedicated to the gods. Dedications and consecrations of statues, altars, and the like were prescribed by the oracle of Delphi and Dodona, and according to Plato, female or male priests, he says, quote, act as as sacrifice for the gods, unquote. The practice of rituals was an important part of the festivals, where dancing and music were also central activities. However, as will be argued, contrary to the exuberant Chinese presentation of music and rituals, Plato preferred the controlled, calculated dance movements and the simple, calm music of the Dorian scale that is devoid of sensuality and emotion. Plato's love for the calm and rhythmic and hence rational dance movements and melody is reflected in his statement that just as mothers put their babies to sleep by rocking them in their arms and humming a tune, so the Dionysian priestesses should combine the movement of dance and song. Thus, the external motion dominates the internal, which is the source of the fright and frenzy, if that happens. By its domination, it produces a mental sense of calm and relief. Hence, the rational structure of the calm dance movements is controlled, and form dominates content, the story behind the emotions, which is the case, which in this case is frenzy. There were some dances, the bacchanals, for example, which for Plato were a mimic exhibit of persons affected by liquor, and he had difficulty determining their purpose. He therefore rejected this type of dance, which for him had no specific purpose, as they consist of violent frenzy movements. However, Plato did distinguish the bacchanal dances from those of war and peace. He explained that the educated and disciplined man's dance movements should be not violent. And he says, the more sober the man and the more schooled to fortitude, the less violent the movement, unquote. Dancing consists of two species, the cosmic and the serious, the latter having a dignified effect while the former is ludicrous, for Plato, that is. The serious kind of dance has two subspecies. One represents the movements of the comely body and its valiant soul in battle, and its toils of enforced endurance. The other, the bearing of the continent soul in a state of prosperity and duly measured pleasure. This is the dance of peace. Plato favors the dance of peace because of his formal theory based on rationality that values well-educated and non-emotional body movements that reflect the formal, objective elements of harmony, rhythm, and symmetry. As he states, this dance rejects the right attitude in which there is a well-braced posture which represents, he says, the good body and good mind, and in which the bodily members are kept straight. That was a quote. Another kind of dance is the war dance, the Pyrrhic, as he called dance, which depicts the motions of blows and shots of every kind by various devices of swerving, yielding ground or crouching, as well as the contrary motions which lead to the posture of attack. He's against this kind of dance. Thus, Plato accepts the dance of war only if the bodily motions have correct, non-violent, controlled movements that yield a signified effect. On the other hand, in the peace dance, the performer must have a graceful style, becoming to the law-abiding man. Hence, the correct expressions of vice versus virtue will give pleasure to bad men rather than to virtuous men. This is in agreement with his theory of the good, the moral good, and the beautiful, the holistic, the aesthetic that is good, always going hand in hand, rhythmically and in harmony. Unlike animals, most human beings are capable of perceiving and enjoying rhythm and melody. This is noticeable in choric art, whose content is rhythm and melody. In both dance and singing, the part which deals with bodily movement has rhythm in common with the movements of the voice. In Plato's scheme of things, there are two branches of instruction and learning: physical culture, concerned with the body and music, that aims at mental excellence, and physical culture consists of dancing and wrestling. And there is another quote which I'm going to read. Plato insists, all these are in his laws, in the late laws after 600. Plato insists that the performer maintain a graceful style of dancing in a way becoming to the law-abiding man, he says. He draws a distinction between questionable dances and those beyond question. The dances that are dedicated to and performed in the honor of the gods express, quote, a sense of well-being, unquote. But dance cannot be performed without music, for the bodily movements by themselves do not express or mean anything in particular. Thus, music is an important part of the Greek rituals. Furthermore, for Plato, proper education gives the proper surroundings and brings out what is best in the soul. Education in music is designed to forge a wholesome discipline. Music is one of the most important disciplines, because I'm only going to read part of this quote. More than anything else, rhythm and harmony find their way to the inmost soul and take strongest hold upon it, bringing with them and imparting grace, because omissions and the failure of beauty in things badly made or grown would be most quickly perceived by one who is properly educated in music. As for the teachers, Plato says, that is the teachers of music, they must be very sensitive to rhythmic and melodic structure. He goes so far as to say that a man with no choric training is uneducated. Moreover, the performers must be educated to a degree better than that of a choir. They must understand and be able to judge rhythms and melodies, and only one familiar with the Dorian scale may be the judge of the rightness or wrongness of the rhythm. Music educates the guardians through habits, imparting by the melody of certain harmony of spirit that is not science, and by the rhythm, measure, and grace. It is through music, Musiki, that man develops the love of the beautiful, and for Plato, the love of the beautiful is the love of the good. And then he talks about the educated person. Accordingly, true beauty and grace spring out of the formal elements of harmony, rhythm, and melody. First, one perceives the formal elements, then loves them, and finally, one recognizes beauty that in turn reflects the good. Furthermore, he says, quote, good speech then, good accord, good grace, and good rhythm wait upon a good disposition, not that weakness of head which we euphemistically style goodness of heart, but the truly good and fair disposition of the character and the mind, unquote. Ancient Greek music is divided into several types and patterns. One type of song consists of prayers to the gods. The second and contrasting type is the lament. Paeans constitute the third type, and there is the fourth, the dithyramb, dealing with the birth of Dionysus. Furthermore, there is nomi with the qualification of synthareodic. Using one type of melody for another is not permitted. The various types of music bring pleasure to a variety of audiences, just as a puppet show will, for instance, bring pleasure to children. And as Plato thinks in another quote, that it is the good music that will appeal to the educated person, as the puppets appeal to the children. For Plato, citizens should aim at the noblest kind of song and at the kind of music that is right and not just pleasing. A man who does not understand the rightness of a particular production is not in a position to discuss the goodness or badness of the work. He points out that some ignorant poets, quote, possessed by a frantic lust for pleasure, mixed up hymns with lament and paeans with dithyrambs, and created a universal confusion of forms. The right standard for him was the pleasure given to the audience. It follows that for Plato, the standard for rightness in music is not its pleasure-giving effect. Pleasure cannot be the standard of judgment. In fact, for him, it is blasphemous to say so. Plato, as a formalist and rationalist, does not simply express his points of view on music, but he also develops a theory on which the ceremonial dances of the various rituals depend. It is a theory of music for the sake of music, by analyzing the objective importance of melody and rhythm, a theory not influenced by religion or human emotions. His is a formal theory emphasizing the form and the structure of music, and dance by disregarding the content, the story that is behind it. The underpinning message, and the underlying feelings. One of the greatest Chinese philosophers who lived about 100 years after Plato, Sunja, had a different understanding of music, dance, and rituals in general, even though his general ideas of life are sometimes close to Plato's. Sunja's cultural background generated completely different approaches and ideas. In his description of dance, Sunja is brief and terse. His reference to dances such as the great elegance, the libation, the militant martial, panpipe, etc., and a few others, pertains to the music that accompanies them rather than the bodily movements. As with rites, these dances originated from and were established by the various princes who founded the dynasties, such as Yu, who established the Xia dynasty. Sunja does not give details of these dances, but he records the statements others made about them. For example, he says that when Prince Zhu of Yu witnessed the great elegance dance in 542 BC, he exclaimed, "Admirable indeed." Zealous labors without any claim to moral power, which but you would have been capable of this cultivation. In other words, he was the creator of that, admiring himself. Sunja, who informed us that the militant dance showed, quote, the ambition of King Yu, based it is Sunja who quoted the ambition of the King Yu. Based on the above, the craft of dance was apparently always associated with someone from the upper stratum of society, that is, a prince or a king. The majority of the ancient Chinese dances dealt with the subjects of war, death, and killing. As such, they featured and presented violent bodily movements. The Greek rituals, on the other hand, having their origins in the oracles of Delphi and Dodona, were based on the worship of the gods. In Chinese cultures, the origins of rituals can be traced. In Chinese culture, the origins of rituals can be traced to ancestor worship, and they were established by the ancient kings. The basic principles and origin of rituals, unlike the case of Platonic Greece, are tied to the social hierarchy and infused with moral elements. That's why the Greek rituals were directly related to the religious ceremonies established by the people, not princes or kings, and dedicated to the gods. The Chinese rituals have a clear social basis and moral connotations, although it should be pointed out that the kings, because of their elevated social hierarchical status, were almost deified. According to Sunja, since men cannot curb their desires, they contend with one another, and this results to chaos. To prevent and control such disorder, the ancient kings established the rites, and Sunja claims, it's another quote about the rites. But according to Sunja, ritual principles have three roots: the root of life, that is heaven and earth, the root of kinship, forebears, and the root of order, lords and teachers. These principles provide peace and security for men. People succeed in life only if they proceed in accordance with the way with capital W. The way was a kind of a ritual written on the basis of principles. By good form, Kunzi means honoring the roots. As for reason, he refers to employing familiar foods. When people act in accordance with moral principles and rituals, observing good form and reason, they nurture their emotions. Thus, Sunja's notion of good form and rational in rituals is quite different from Plato's. While Sunja's focus of rituals is concerned with how to nurture the emotions and fulfill the obligations that lead to the way, Plato thought on this is purely rationalistic. Rituals for Plato are a part of a citizen's obligation to fulfill religious and social obligations only. There is nothing poetic or mythical in his perception of rites. On the contrary, Sunja's view is poetic, moral, and perhaps even primal in the sense that it expresses rituals' importance in man's life as it is related to the cosmos. And then there is another quote here, which I'm not going to read. In Sunja's thinking, ritual principles are the basis of the highest sense of morality and social order, which are in accord with a rational order. Since rituals embrace moral principles and not just desires and emotion, personal involvement and participation in ritual practice will satisfy and fulfill one's ritual duties, desires, emotions, and morality at the same time. For music, for Sunja, affects our inner states and alters our character. As a result, those who observe rituals become perfect. However, Sunja does not explain the structure of this perfection. Furthermore, he bases perfection on rather external elements. Once a person fulfills his ritual duties, he is perfect. Man's evil nature is transformed by his participation in rituals, contrary to Plato's emphasis on form's objective elements. Sunja's notion of perfection is based both on moral attainment and ritual adherence to the external forms of rituals. A person trained in ritual, for him, is an expert in everything, so much so that he may even be considered an expert designer. And I have another quote. Thus, a man who has not mastered rituals would not have been able to create such a design. This view is in sharp contrast to Plato's, which declares that only the rationally educated person, not the person trained in rituals, would be capable of creating a rationally aesthetic whole, beautiful whole. Mastering the rituals for Sunja is important. The only way to achieve this is by following the teacher's guidance. Hence, the teacher's role in shaping one's life is crucial. It is the teacher who will help the individual to achieve a balanced and harmonious personality. He will help the person to regulate the key. The key, which is QI, is the breath, the air, everything that you are made of. And cultivate the mind is
energy, perhaps? Energy, what we say today.
It's
energy,
the air we
breath.
breathe. No, not energy. It's like oxygen. It's like, anyway.
Pnoe, we could say. Pnoe, perhaps. The Greek word.
It's more than that. It's more complicated. It's complicated. The key, the Chinese QE is more complicated. Find it in the dictionary. Such a view is in sharp contrast with the Platonic way of thinking. According to Sunja, the teacher and the practice of rituals enabled and molded moral cultivation. In Plato, as reflected in his myth of the cave, individuals must struggle by themselves to achieve knowledge and the good through reasoning only. You don't buy it. Rights for Sunja are the highest expression of order, the root of strength in the state, the way by which the majestic way of authority is created. It follows that Chinese rituals depend on that majestic authority that Sunja describes, the hierarchical social of the ancient kings and princes. Quite different from Plato's, of course, hierarchical notion based on reason and not social status. For Sunja, a person well acquainted with the ritual principles has methods and standards. Rites, he says, quote, trim what is too long, eliminate excess, remedy deficiency, and extend cultivated forms that express love and respect so that they increase and complete the beauty and conduct according to one's duty. Hence, the adoption and exercise of rituals form the basis of a morally ordered life. By behaving according to rituals, the emotions are at peace. Ritual is the means by which one's person is rectified, and that leads to completion and fulfillment. Sunja is also interested in music's effect on man. What sustains tranquility in life, he contends, is music. Musical instruments, musicians, happiness and elegant adornment through rituals. While rituals after the individual's character, music transforms the inward movements of the mind. Music, he says, is joy. With joy, it produces, quote, an inner serenity and repose, unquote. Being an essential part of man's emotional nature, Sunja believed the expression of joy is by necessity inescapable. But as with rituals, for Sunja, it was the ancient kings who created music to celebrate their power, which is called D, or death. And there is a little quote, music provides the means to secure the power and morality, the means to find a home in it. The highest embodiment attained in ritual is also the perfection of expression attained in music. Even though Sunja wrote about the importance of music in rituals, He did not develop a theory as Plato did. His understanding of music is nowhere close to Plato's rational, systematic analysis. For Sunja, music gives form to natural language of sound and movement. So sounds change according to the emotion involved. Music is appreciated for what it accomplishes by accompanying rituals and the emotion it creates. This is far from Plato's objective appreciation of music for its intrinsic value. As Plato points out in his criticism of Egyptian music, quote, "It is possible to canonize melodies which exhibit an intrinsic rightness permanently by law," unquote. It is interesting to know how important music's role is in influencing emotions and how much emphasis Sunja and Chinese thought in general place on emotion. Such emphasis differs considerably from Plato's highly rational notion of music. For Sunja, music affects our inner states and alters our character. I have a page and a quarter and I'm finishing. The combination of music and rituals creates in the person inner harmony and outward modesty. He becomes reverential as his inner and outer self is transformed. The cultivation of his inner power, that which is called in Chinese De, shines in his face and seen in his actions and speech. When people see the inner harmony and outward modesty in an individual, they are affected directly, so much so that they accept and obey him. Well, don't forget that all these were put in their minds by the kings and the princes. This is why all the sages made the cultivation of music their first task in founding a dynasty. While Plato's teaching of music is used as a tool to promote man's rational thinking and elevate his soul, Sunja's interest in music is of a political nature, in that music elevates the few to the highest social level and position of power. Those who underwent this transformation were the so-called sage kings. Musical tones, having their origins in the human mind, ultimately connect humans and the cosmos. As the kings regulated music in the state, they transformed men and repressed their evil sentiments to the extent that Sunja believed man's nature to be evil. That is, people are born bad, evil. Since human nature is evil, we must elevate the sages and esteem ritual and rightness, Sunja thought. If music's message is good, then the response to it and the influence by it will also be good. Thus, music's message, that is the content, was crucial in the formation of the human character. Plato dismisses content for the same exact reason that Sunja adopts it. He accepts the form, that is, the formal elements on which the structure of music depends, but not its emotional influence. And the reason, of course, is obvious, because it leads people to rationalistic kind of behavior and thoughts. As a result, Plato dismisses the Lydian and Phrygian music because of its emotional effect and welcomed the Dorian music with its simplicity and seriousness. Finally, another example of the difference between Sunja and Plato is illustrated by this remark of the former, quote, "Music creates harmony in a community, state, or a nation because it affects all men the same way, since they share the same nature and have the same emotions." By the same nature, Sunja means the evil nature of man. Nobody is born good. Only the ancient kings are not included in these categories, and the princes. By regulating music, the ancient kings believed that man's evil sentiments would be repressed, and if they were not, anarchy would prevail in society. Plato does not at all share Sunja's belief in man's evil nature, of course. Man is not evil, and the realization of his potential depends on the environment in which man lives, his education, and his strivings in life. Man's freedom to grow is entirely dependent on him only. His future is not predetermined. For Sunja, the well-being of man's life and future depended on the ancient kings who created the institutions, music and rituals for the enhancement of man's evil nature, even though the end result of music is the engendering of great joys, a supreme emotion. Music creates, he says, a whole that produces the exhilaration of joy and the glow of mutual affections in all who experience it, unquote. To sum up, while both and Sunja were concerned with rituals and music in human life, they differed sharply in what their fundamental function is. For Plato, it is the rational element of the soul that underpins the ritual and music and brings forth the goodness and beauty of a formal structure. It is the form, the structure, the formal elements, harmony, rhythm, symmetry of the rituals and music that appeals to the rational part of the soul. On the other hand, for Sunja, it is the content, the message in music and rituals that appeals to man. It affects, induces, and elevates his emotions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this συναρπαστική, if I may say.
Thank you.